The sun was rising at Pine Valley Military Base, but thick morning fog made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Jenny Baker, a young officer in charge of the soldiers' daily attendance, was checking the morning list when she noticed something strange. Tom White, one of her newest soldiers, was running toward her office, out of breath and looking scared. "Officer Baker! Officer Baker!" Tom stopped at her desk, trying to catch his breath. "Something weird happened to my dog tags. You know, the metal necklace things we wear with our names on them." He pulled the chain from around his neck with shaking hands. Jenny looked at the tags, expecting to see Tom White written on them. Instead, the name read, Robert Smith. She checked her computer records. There was no Robert Smith currently at the base. "Maybe someone switched your tags as a joke?" Jenny suggested, but deep down she felt something wasn't right. Tom shook his head. "That's impossible. I never take them off. And the weird thing is, yesterday they had my name on them. I'm sure of it. I cleaned them before bed like we're supposed to." Jenny was about to tell Tom not to worry when 3 more soldiers walked into her office. All of them had the same problem. Their dog tags showed different names that morning. What made it even scarier was that when Jenny checked the old base records, all these new names belonged to soldiers who had died at Pine Valley Base many years ago. The base leader, Bob Johnson, acted very strange when Jenny told him about the dog tags. His face went white, and he quickly said, "Don't worry about it. Just a mix-up at the factory where they make the tags." But Jenny could tell he was hiding something. His hands were shaking when he shut his office door. That night, Jenny couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the strange names. Getting out of bed, she decided to check her own dog tags, something she hadn't done in weeks. When she looked at them under her flashlight, her heart stopped. Instead of seeing Jenny Baker, she saw Mary Baker, her mother's name. Jenny's mother had also been a soldier at Pine Valley Base. She disappeared 20 years ago during a night training exercise, along with 5 other soldiers. The Army told Jenny it was an accident, but they never found any bodies. Jenny was only 10 years old then. While Jenny stared at her mother's name on the tags, someone knocked on her door. It was Annie Green, a young soldier who worked in the old filing room. "Officer Baker," Annie whispered, looking around nervously. "You need to see this right now. We found something in the basement while cleaning." Jenny followed Annie down to the basement. The air felt cold and damp, and their footsteps echoed in the empty hallways. Annie led her to a rusty old filing cabinet and pulled out a dusty folder. Inside were hundreds of papers, each with a different soldier's name. Jenny saw Robert Smith's name and all the other names that had appeared on the dog tags that morning. But what scared her most was seeing her mother's name. Mary Baker, test subject number 247, mind transfer project. Status, failed. Suddenly, all the lights in the basement went out. In the darkness, Jenny heard what sounded like many people marching, but she knew everyone except the night guards should be asleep. The marching got louder and louder. Then, in the beam of her flashlight, Jenny saw something that made her blood run cold. Wet footprints were appearing on the floor, one after another, but there was nobody making them. A cold wind blew through the basement, and Jenny heard a whisper that sounded just like her mother's voice. "Find the truth, Jenny. Find out what they did to us in room B17. Before Jenny could move, more whispers filled the air. Through the basement window, she saw something even stranger. Hundreds of soldiers marching in perfect lines across the foggy yard, but they were slightly transparent like ghosts. Each one wore dog tags that glowed in the dark. Annie grabbed Jenny's arm. "Officer Baker, look at this." She pointed to a map that had fallen out of the folder. It showed secret underground rooms beneath the base, rooms that weren't on any official map. And room B17 was marked in red ink with the words, "Mind Transfer Chamber." As Jenny picked up the map, her dog tags suddenly felt ice cold against her skin. When she looked down at them, they now showed a different name. Subject, Shoe 48, next in line. The basement door slammed shut by itself, and they heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Through the crack under the door, they could see the shadow of base leader Bob Johnson. He was talking to someone saying, "We can't let them find out what really happened. The mind transfer machine is still down there. If they discover the truth about the experiments. Jenny and Annie looked at each other in fear. They were trapped in the basement, with ghost soldiers outside, a mysterious mind transfer machine somewhere below them, and the base leader blocking their only way out. But Jenny knew one thing for sure. She was finally going to find out what really happened to her mother, no matter how dangerous the truth might be. Jenny and Annie held their breath as Bob Johnson's footsteps came closer to the basement door. They quickly hid behind a large shelf filled with old boxes. Through the gaps between the files, they could see him enter with a flashlight in his hand. But he wasn't alone. Behind him was Dr. Bill Stone, the base's old medical officer who had retired 10 years ago. "The machine is acting up again," Dr. Stone whispered, his voice shaking. "Just like it did 20 years ago when we lost control. The souls are leaking out, Bill. They're trying to warn the others through the dog tags." Jenny's heart beat faster. Souls? What did they mean by souls leaking out? Bob Johnson walked to the filing cabinet and started pulling out more folders. "We need to destroy all these records before anyone finds them. The government will shut us down if they discover we're still running the program." "But what about the new test subject?" Dr. Stone asked. "Subject number 248 is ready. We've been preparing her without her even knowing it." Jenny looked down at her dog tags again. Subject number 248. They were talking about her. She felt sick to her stomach as she realized they had been planning something for her all along. Suddenly, Annie sneezed. Both men turned toward the shelf where they were hiding. But before they could discover them, something strange happened. All the papers in the room started flying around by themselves like they were caught in a windstorm inside the basement. The ghost soldiers appeared again, their shapes clearer this time. One of them stepped forward, a woman in an old military uniform. Jenny had to cover her mouth to stop herself from screaming. It was her mother. The ghost of Mary Baker walked straight through Bob Johnson, making him fall to his knees, shivering. "You won't hurt my daughter," her voice echoed through the basement. "You've taken enough souls for your machine." Dr. Stone backed away toward the door, his face white with fear. "The containment field is breaking down completely. They're all getting out." While the men were distracted by the ghosts, Jenny grabbed the map and as many files as she could carry. She noticed a small key that had fallen from one of the folders. It had B-17 written on it. Annie followed her as they quietly slipped past the chaos and out into the hallway. But they didn't get far. At the end of the corridor stood Tom White, but something was wrong with him. His eyes were completely white, and when he spoke, it wasn't his voice. "You need to see what's in the lower levels," he said in an old man's voice. "My name is Robert Smith. They trapped me in the machine in 1962. Your mother tried to help us escape, but they caught her. Now she's trapped too, along with hundreds of others." Tom's body collapsed, but Jenny caught him before he hit the ground. He was breathing but unconscious. The dog tags around his neck were glowing bright blue, and they felt warm to the touch. Looking at the map, Jenny saw that room B-17 was 5 levels below where they were now. According to the blueprints, there was a hidden elevator behind one of the walls in the old supply room, but getting there wouldn't be easy. They would have to go through the base's main hallway where the night guards were patrolling. Just then, Annie pointed to something terrifying. Down every corridor, all the dog tags left hanging in the empty offices had started to glow. They floated up by themselves and began moving through the air, like they were leading the way to somewhere. Behind them, they could hear Bob Johnson shouting orders into his radio. "Lock down the base. Don't let anyone near the old supply room." Jenny looked at Annie and whispered, "We have to get to that elevator. My mother's soul is trapped in some kind of machine, and I think all these ghosts are trying to help us free them. Are you with me?" Annie nodded, but then pointed to something through the window that made them both freeze. Army trucks were pulling up to the base, and soldiers in strange black uniforms were getting out. On their shoulders was a symbol they had never seen before, a human skull with glowing blue eyes. "Special Containment Unit," Annie whispered. "I saw their name in one of the files. They're the ones who built the mind transfer machine. They come whenever souls try to escape." Jenny and Annie pressed themselves against the wall as flashlight beams swept through the corridors. The sound of heavy boots echoed from both directions. The night guards from one side and the special containment unit from the other. They were trapped. "In here," whispered a voice behind them. They turned to see Rose, the old cleaning lady who had worked at the base for 30 years. She was holding open a door they had never noticed before, perfectly hidden in the wall's paneling. "Your mother showed me these service tunnels years ago, Jenny. She knew this day would come." They slipped inside just as the soldiers ran past. The tunnel was narrow and dark, with pipes running along the ceiling. Rose led them forward, her small flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. "I've been watching them for years," she said as they walked. "Every full moon they take someone down to that machine. They come back different, like they're still walking and talking, but empty inside." Suddenly Rose stopped. Her hand went to her chest, pulling out her own dog tags. They were glowing brighter than any of the others. "Oh dear," she said softly. "I was wondering when this would happen." Her eyes turned white like Tom's had, but she didn't fall. Instead, she smiled. "Jenny, it's Mom." Rose's mouth moved, but it was Mary Baker's voice coming out. "I don't have much time. The machine. It doesn't just transfer minds, it traps souls. They're using it to create perfect soldiers, empty bodies they can control. But something went wrong. The souls are fighting back." "Mom?" Jenny reached out to touch Rose's hand, but it passed right through like touching cold air. "Why do they want me? What's subject number 248? "Because you're special, honey. You're like me, a soul walker. We can move between bodies, help trapped souls escape. That's why I disappeared. I found out what they were doing and tried to free the souls, but they caught me. They've been watching you, waiting for your power to develop. Tonight, when the moon is full, they plan to—" Rose's body jerked suddenly, and her eyes returned to normal. She looked confused for a moment, then collapsed against the wall, breathing heavily. "I'm sorry," she whispered in her own voice again. "It takes so much energy for them to speak through us." The tunnel filled with a strange blue light. All their dog tags were glowing at once, and in that light, they could see hundreds of handprints on the walls, glowing handprints that hadn't been visible before. Under each print was a name and a date, going back to the 1960s. Annie ran her flashlight over the names. "They're all here, everyone who was taken to the machine. Look, here's Robert Smith's handprint and— Jenny, here's your mother's." Jenny touched her mother's handprint. The moment she did, something extraordinary happened. All the handprints began to pulse with light, like heartbeats. A huge gust of wind rushed through the tunnel, and with it came whispers. Hundreds of voices speaking at once. "Free us! The machine must be destroyed! Midnight approaches! Soul Walker!" The wind died down, but now they could hear something else. A deep humming sound coming from below them. The walls vibrated slightly and loose dirt fell from the ceiling. "They're powering up the machine," Rose said, her voice filled with fear. "They know you're here, Jenny. They're getting it ready for you." Annie checked her watch. "It's 11:30, 30 minutes until midnight." Jenny looked at the key in her hand, the key to room B17. She could try to run to escape the base entirely, but as she touched her mother's handprint again, she knew she couldn't leave. Not with all these souls trapped in the machine. Not with her mother counting on her. Just then they heard heavy footsteps in the tunnel behind them. A deep voice called out, "Subject number 248, we know you're a soul walker. Your mother's abilities have grown too strong. We can't contain her anymore. But you'll be different. Your power will serve us better." Rose pointed to a ladder built into the wall. "This leads to level 5. Room B17 is at the end of the north corridor. But Jenny," she hesitated, "the things I've seen down there, the machine isn't the worst of it. There's something else, something they created with all those trapped souls." Before Jenny could ask what she meant, the tunnel began to shake violently. In the distance, they heard an inhuman scream that made their blood run cold. Annie's flashlight beam caught something moving in the darkness behind them. Something big, with glowing blue eyes and a body that seemed to be made of writhing shadows and floating dog tags. "Run!" Rose shouted, pushing them toward the ladder. "Don't look back! Just get to B17 before midnight!" As Jenny started climbing down the ladder, she heard Rose scream. Looking up, she saw the old cleaning lady's body glowing bright blue as hundreds of souls poured into her at once. Rose turned to face the shadow creature, her voice now a chorus of all the trapped souls speaking together. "We'll hold it back. Save us, Soul Walker. Save us all." Jenny and Annie climbed down the ladder as fast as they could. Above them, they heard the sounds of a battle. Rose's voice mixed with hundreds of others as she fought the shadow creature. The ladder seemed to go on forever in the darkness, the only light coming from their glowing dog tags. Finally, their feet touched solid ground on level 5. The corridor here was different. The walls were made of thick metal instead of concrete, and strange blue lines glowed along the floor, pulsing like veins. The air felt heavy and cold, and their breath came out as white mist. "Look at this," Annie whispered, pointing to a sign on the wall. "Project Soul Keeper. Authorized personnel only." Below it was a list of names, scientists who had worked on the project. The first name made Jenny gasp. Lead researcher, Dr. Bill Stone, 1962, present. "He's been doing this for over 60 years? Jenny couldn't believe it. "But he doesn't look that old." They heard voices coming from around the corner and quickly hid behind some large metal containers. 2 men in white lab coats walked past, talking in excited voices. "Subject number 248 will be perfect," one said. "A natural soul walker, just like her mother. With her power, we can finally complete the army." "Yes," said the other. "No more dealing with escaped souls. No more failed transfers. She'll be able to control them all." After the scientists passed, Jenny and Annie crept down the hallway. Through windows in the walls, they saw rooms filled with strange equipment. In one room, rows of dog tags hung from the ceiling, all glowing with different colored lights. In another, they saw empty bodies laying on beds, like sleeping soldiers waiting for souls to fill them. They finally reached a large door marked B17. Jenny's hands shook as she took out the key, but before she could use it, they heard a familiar voice. "I'm sorry, Jenny," said Bob Johnson, stepping out of the shadows with a gun. "We really didn't want to do this the hard way." More soldiers appeared behind him, all wearing those strange black uniforms with the glowing-eyed skull. But something was wrong with them. Their movements were too stiff, their eyes empty, like puppets being pulled by strings. "They're not real soldiers," Annie whispered. "Look at their dog tags. They're all glowing the same color. They're being controlled." Bob Johnson smiled. "Very observant. These are our success stories. Perfect soldiers who follow every order without question. No fear, no doubts, no soul to get in the way. And soon, Jenny, you'll help us make many more." Suddenly, all the controlled soldiers grabbed their heads and screamed. Their dog tags flashed brightly, and one by one they collapsed to the ground. Behind them stood Tom White, his eyes glowing white again. "Run, Jenny!" It was Robert Smith's voice coming from Tom's mouth. "Your mother and the others are fighting to give you time. Use your power. Remember who you are." Bob Johnson aimed his gun at Tom, but Jenny felt something surge inside her, a warm energy she'd never felt before. Without thinking, she reached out her hand. Instantly, every dog tag in the hallway ripped free from the fallen soldiers and flew toward Bob Johnson like metal bullets. He dove for cover, dropping his gun. Jenny and Annie ran for the door to B17. The key turned easily in the lock, and they rushed inside, slamming the door behind them. What they saw inside made them freeze. The room was enormous, like a giant cave made of metal. In the center stood a massive machine that looked like a twisted tree made of glass tubes and metal, reaching from floor to ceiling. Inside the tubes, blue energy flowed like liquid light, and trapped in that energy were faces, hundreds of human faces, silently screaming. At the base of the machine sat Dr. Stone, but he looked different now, younger somehow. He stood up and spread his arms wide. "Welcome home, Jenny," he said, but his voice wasn't human anymore. It echoed with the sounds of 1,000 trapped souls. "We've been waiting 70 years for someone like you." The machine behind him pulsed brighter, and in every tube the faces turned to look at Jenny. In one of them she saw her mother, pounding against the glass, trying to warn her about something. But what terrified Jenny most was seeing her own face in one of the empty tubes, waiting for her. 70 years? Jenny asked, backing away from Dr. Stone. That's impossible. You'd be over 100 years old. Dr. Stone laughed, but the sound was hollow and metallic. He walked closer, and under the blue light of the machine, they could see what he really was. His skin looked like glass, and inside, blue energy swirled just like in the tubes. He wasn't human at all. I am the first success of Project Soulkeeper, he said. My real body died in 1962, but I found a way to live forever. This body is just a shell, made of special glass and metal. I can transfer my soul into a new one whenever I want. Annie pointed at the machine. All these people, you trapped them here just so you could live forever? Not just for me, Dr. Stone smiled. Think bigger. Imagine an army that never dies. When a soldier falls, we simply move their soul to a new body. Perfect soldiers who keep all their training and experience but never age, never question orders, never die. The faces in the tubes were moving faster now, their silent screams becoming more desperate. Jenny saw her mother pointing at something, a large red button behind the machine. But it didn't work right, did it? Jenny said, trying to keep Dr. Stone talking while she slowly moved around the room. The souls fought back. They didn't want to be your slaves. Dr. Stone's glass face cracked a little as he frowned. Yes, they resisted. Especially your mother. Soul walkers are difficult to control. But you'll be different. You're younger, stronger. With your power, we can finally control all the souls at once. Suddenly, the door burst open. Bob Johnson ran in with more controlled soldiers. But before they could grab Jenny, something amazing happened. All the dog tags in the room, hundreds of them hanging on the walls, began to spin in the air. They spun faster and faster until they made a tornado of metal around Jenny. She felt the power growing inside her, stronger than before. She could hear the voices of all the trapped souls, teaching her how to use her ability. With a wave of her hand, the dog tags shot out like throwing stars, smashing into the glass tubes of the machine. No! Dr. Stone screamed as blue energy began leaking out. Do you know what you're doing? If the souls escape all at once? He never finished his sentence. The machine made a loud cracking sound as more tubes shattered. Souls poured out like a blue waterfall, rushing into the controlled soldiers. One by one, the soldiers dropped their weapons and began helping break the machine apart. Bob Johnson tried to run, but the souls caught him. His eyes glowed blue as the truth poured into him. I remember now, he said in a shaking voice. I remember what they made me do. Dr. Stone's glass body was cracking all over now. He ran for a small door hidden behind the machine, but Jenny wasn't going to let him escape. Using her power, she sent one last dog tag flying, her own. It hit him right in the back and his glass body shattered into a million pieces. But then something went wrong. The machine was breaking too fast. Blue energy exploded out of it like a tidal wave. Jenny felt herself being lifted off the ground. Jenny! It was her mother's voice, closer than ever. Mary Baker's soul floated in front of her daughter. There's too much power. The souls are breaking free all at once. The whole base might collapse. What do we do? Jenny cried, still floating in the air as chaos swirled around them. Use your power, her mother said. You can guide the souls out safely. But honey, there's something you need to know. Once the machine is destroyed, we can't stay. All the trapped souls must move on. Tears filled Jenny's eyes as she understood. Even you? Her mother's soul reached out, and for a moment Jenny felt the warm hug she had missed for 20 years. I'll always love you, Jenny. Now set us free. Annie grabbed Jenny's hand, keeping her from floating away as more explosions rocked the base. Whatever you're going to do it fast. Jenny closed her eyes, feeling all the souls swirling around her. She raised her hands, and something incredible began to happen. Jenny felt her power growing stronger as thousands of souls swirled around her like a blue tornado. She thought about all the people trapped here, soldiers who had families waiting for them, people who had been stuck in that horrible machine for years. With all her strength, she reached out her hands and made a pathway of floating dog tags, leading up through the ceiling, through all 5 levels, straight to the night sky above. Follow the tags, she shouted. They'll lead you to freedom. The souls began to move, flowing upward like a river of light. Each one touched their own dog tag as they passed, saying goodbye to their earthly connection. Jenny saw Robert Smith's soul nod to her as he flew past. Tom White, who had helped them, woke up on the floor and watched in amazement as the souls escaped. But the machine wasn't done yet. As it broke apart, dark shadows began leaking out, the same kind of creature that had attacked them in the tunnel. These were the angry souls, the ones that had been trapped the longest, twisted by years of pain. "The shadow souls," Annie screamed. "They're trying to pull everyone back in." The shadow creatures reached out with long, dark arms, trying to grab the escaping souls. Jenny knew she had to do something. She concentrated harder, and all the dog tags began to glow with bright white light, forming a protective shield around the path to freedom. "Go!" Jenny shouted to Annie. "Get everyone out of the base! I'll hold the shadows back!" Annie hesitated, but Tom grabbed her arm. "She's right, this whole place could collapse." As they ran, Jenny stayed floating in the air, fighting to keep the path open. The shadow souls clawed at her light shield, but she wouldn't let them through. Her mother's soul stayed beside her, helping her hold back the darkness. Suddenly, from Dr. Stone's shattered glass body, a dark shape rose up, his true form twisted by decades of evil experiments. He was the biggest shadow of all, made of swirling black fog with glowing red eyes. "If I can't have their souls," his voice boomed, "I'll take yours instead." He lunged at Jenny, but at that moment something incredible happened. Every single dog tag that had ever been in the base, thousands of them, came flying down the hallways, drawn to Jenny's power. They spun around her faster and faster, creating a shield of silver metal. Jenny felt the strength of every soul flowing through her. With a bright flash, the dog tags shot outward like a wave of light. They hit Dr. Stone's shadow form from all directions, tearing him apart until he was nothing but wisps of dark smoke that faded away forever. The base was shaking harder now. Pieces of ceiling were falling everywhere. Jenny looked up at her mother's soul still beside her. "Mom, I don't want to lose you again," she cried. "You never lost me, honey." Her mother's voice was soft and kind. "I've been watching over you all these years, and I'll still be watching. But now we all need to be free." Mary Baker's soul kissed Jenny's forehead one last time. Then she joined the river of light flowing up to the sky. Jenny watched as the last of the trapped souls escaped, their dog tags falling to the ground, now just ordinary pieces of metal again. With the last of her strength, Jenny floated herself to the exit. She ran through the crumbling hallways, upstairs and through doors, following the trail of fallen dog tags. Finally, she burst out of the base's main door into the cool night air. Annie, Tom, and about 50 confused soldiers were standing in the parking lot, watching in amazement. Above the base, the souls were rising into the night sky like blue fireworks, joining the stars above. As each soul found peace, their light faded away. The ground shook one last time, and with a loud rumble, the old base began to collapse in on itself. Decades of dark secrets were being buried forever. The shadow souls were gone, Dr. Stone was destroyed, and Project Soulkeeper would never hurt anyone again. As the dust settled, Jenny walked to where Annie and Tom stood. Together they watched the last few souls disappear into the beautiful night sky. Jenny held her dog tags in her hand. They were normal again, showing just her name. But now she knew they meant so much more. They weren't just pieces of metal. They were reminders that every soldier had a soul, a story, and deserved to be free. The next morning, as the sun rose over the ruins of Pine Valley Base, government trucks and news vans filled the parking lot. Men in suits were everywhere, taking pictures and asking questions. But something strange had happened. Nobody who wasn't there last night could enter the collapsed base. An invisible wall seemed to keep them out, as if the freed souls were protecting their secrets. Jenny, Annie, and Tom sat in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in blankets. Bob Johnson sat with them, looking tired but different, more human. The souls had shown him the truth before they left, and now he was telling everything to the government investigators. "I can't believe I forgot," he kept saying. "They made me forget everything. For years, I helped them without knowing what I was really doing. Other soldiers who had been controlled were waking up too, confused but relieved. Their memories were coming back slowly. The base doctor checked everyone but found something odd. All the soldiers who had been controlled by the machine were now younger, as if the years of their captivity had been given back to them. Rose, the cleaning lady, was okay too. The souls had protected her during the fight with the shadow creature. She went around handing out hot coffee to everyone, acting like nothing strange had happened. But Jenny noticed how she smiled at the sky every now and then, as if sharing a secret with the stars. Later that day, Jenny found Tom staring at a pile of dog tags on the ground, thousands of them that had fallen after the souls left. Each tag told a story of someone who had been trapped in the machine. "What should we do with them?" Tom asked. Jenny picked up one of the tags. It was Robert Smith's. "We need to find their families," she said. "Tell them what really happened to their loved ones. They deserve to know the truth." Annie, who was good with computers, was already making a list. "I saved some files from the base before it collapsed," she said. "We can match the names to their families. Maybe it will help them find peace too." Suddenly, Jenny felt something warm in her pocket. It was her mother's old dog tags, the real ones from 20 years ago. They were glowing softly, but not with the blue light of trapped souls. This was a gentle, warm light, like sunlight through clouds. As she held them, she heard her mother's voice one last time, faint but clear. "I'm proud of you, Jenny. The base is gone, but there are other places, other trapped souls that need help. You're a soul walker now. You'll know where to find them." Annie saw the look in Jenny's eyes. "There are more bases like this one, aren't there?" Jenny nodded. Project Soulkeeper was big. They had facilities all over the country, and now... She stood up, feeling stronger than ever. "Now we know how to shut them down." Tom grabbed his own dog tags, which still glowed a little. "I can still feel them sometimes. The souls who helped us. It's like they left a little bit of their power behind. I want to help too." "Me too," said Annie, holding up the files she'd saved. "Someone needs to keep track of all the souls we free. Make sure their stories are told." Jenny smiled as she looked at her friends. Then she noticed something interesting. More soldiers were gathering around them, all holding their dog tags, all with the same determined look in their eyes. They had been freed from the machine, but they weren't running away. They wanted to help. Bob Johnson walked over, holding a large map. "While I was under their control, I saw the locations of other bases," he said. "I can help you find them. It's the least I can do to make up for what happened." Jenny looked at the map. There were red dots marked all over it. More bases, more trapped souls, more people who needed help. But this time she wasn't alone. She had a team. Rose came over with more coffee. "You kids better get some rest," she said with a knowing smile. "Sounds like you have a lot of work ahead of you." As the sun set on their first day of freedom, Jenny held her glowing dog tags up to the light. She could almost see faces in the metal, all the souls out there waiting to be freed. Her mother had given her life to save others, and now Jenny would continue that mission. "Where do we start?" Annie asked, looking at the map. Jenny pointed to a red dot in the mountains far to the north. "There," she said. "I can feel them calling." 2 weeks later, Jenny and her team were driving through thick mountain forests in an old military truck. Annie sat in the passenger seat, looking at her laptop that showed a detailed map of the area. Tom was in the back with 5 other freed soldiers, all wearing their original dog tags that now glowed faintly in the dark. "The next base should be just over this ridge," Annie said, pointing to a spot on her screen. "It's called Black Pine Facility. According to the files we saved, they've been running soul experiments there since 1975. Jenny felt her dog tags grow warmer as they got closer. She could sense the trapped souls now, hundreds of them, their pain and fear calling out to her. But there was something different about this place, something darker. They parked the truck behind some trees and walked the rest of the way. As they reached the top of a hill, they saw it, a huge concrete building built into the side of the mountain. Unlike Pine Valley Base, this place didn't pretend to be normal. Guard towers stood at every corner, and thick metal fences surrounded the whole facility. "Something's wrong," Tom whispered, touching his glowing dog tags. "The souls here, they feel different, angry, like they've been trapped much longer." Suddenly all their dog tags started vibrating. A cold wind blew through the trees, and in the darkness, they saw something that made them freeze. Walking along the fence were guards, but they weren't human or even the glass bodies like Dr. Stone. These guards were made of pure shadow, their eyes glowing red in the dark. "They learned from their mistakes at Pine Valley," said Bob Johnson, who had come with them to help. "They're not even bothering with human bodies anymore. Those are pure shadow souls, twisted by the machine until they became guards for their own prison." Jenny watched as more shadow guards appeared. There were dozens of them now, all moving in perfect circles around the base. But then she noticed something else. Behind the fence, ordinary dog tags were floating in the air, trying to reach out to her team. The trapped souls were already responding to her presence. "I have an idea," Jenny said, holding up her mother's dog tags. They were glowing brighter than ever. "Mom showed us how to fight the shadows. Remember the light shield we made at Pine Valley? If we all work together?" All 7 freed soldiers stood in a circle, holding their glowing dog tags. Jenny had been teaching them to use the small amount of soul power left in their tags. As they concentrated, the tags began to shine brighter, creating a shield of pure white light around them. "Now comes the hard part," Jenny said, looking at the dark facility ahead. "There are more souls to save this time, and those shadow guards aren't going to make it easy. Is everyone ready?" Annie held up her laptop. "I've got the base blueprints. The soul machine is 3 levels down, heavily guarded." Tom checked his backpack full of special equipment they'd prepared. "We've got everything we need to destroy it." Bob Johnson pulled out his old security cards. These might still work. They use the same systems at all the bases. Jenny took a deep breath as she felt her soul walker powers growing stronger. The trapped souls were calling to her even louder now, begging to be freed. But among their voices, she heard a new sound, her mother's gentle whisper in her mind. "Be careful, honey, this is just the beginning." Looking at her brave team, Jenny knew this would be harder than Pine Valley. But they were ready. They had trained, prepared, and most importantly, they knew exactly what they were fighting for. Every soul they freed made them stronger. "Let's move," Jenny whispered. "Stay in formation, keep the light shield up, and remember, no matter what happens in there, we're not leaving until every soul is free." As they began walking down the hill toward Black Pine facility, their dog tags glowed like stars in the darkness. The shadow guards hadn't seen them yet, but soon they would face something they'd never seen before. A team of soul walkers, working together to right the wrongs of the past. And somewhere up in the night sky, Jenny knew her mother and all the freed souls of Pine Valley were watching over them, sending their strength for the battle ahead. The team moved silently toward the fence, their light shield making them almost invisible against the dark mountain. But just as they reached the first gate, all their dog tags suddenly went cold. The glowing stopped completely. "Something's blocking our power," Jenny whispered. She could still feel the souls inside calling to her, but they seemed farther away now, like a radio losing signal. Annie pointed to strange black boxes mounted on the fence posts. "Power dampeners," she said, checking her laptop. "They installed them after what happened at Pine Valley. They're designed to weaken soul energy." The shadow guards were getting closer. Without their glowing shield, the team would be spotted soon. But Tom was smiling as he opened his backpack. "Good thing we came prepared," he said, pulling out normal-looking dog tags. "These are fakes we made, filled with small batteries. They'll glow just like real ones, but the dampeners can't stop them." They quickly switched to the fake tags, hiding their real ones in special pouches lined with protective material. The battery-powered tags glowed just enough to create a weak light shield, not as strong as their real soul power, but enough to confuse the shadow guards. Bob Johnson used his old security card at the gate. To their surprise, it worked. "They never think anyone would try to break in," he said with a grim smile. Inside the fence, the facility was even bigger than it looked. Thick pipes ran up the mountainside, glowing with that familiar blue energy. But here, the glow was darker, almost purple. "The machine must be huge," Annie whispered, looking at her blueprints. These pipes are carrying soul energy all through the mountain. They're not just trapping souls here, they're mining them like some kind of power source. They found a side door and slipped inside. The hallways were different from Pine Valley. Everything was made of black metal that seemed to absorb light. Their footsteps made no sound, as if the floor was eating the noise. Suddenly, they heard voices coming from a room ahead. Through a window, they saw something that made them all sick. Scientists in black lab coats were standing around a table where a soldier lay unconscious. Above him, floating in a tube, was a shadow soul. They were forcing it into the soldier's body while he screamed in his sleep. "They're not just trapping souls anymore," Jenny said, her hands shaking with anger. "They're turning them into weapons. Those shadow guards outside, they're souls that were tortured until they became evil." "How could they do this?" Tom asked, his face pale. Before anyone could answer, alarms started blaring. Red lights flashed in the hallway and a cold voice came over speakers. "Intruder alert. Soul Walker detected. Initiate containment protocol." "They can sense me even through the dampeners," Jenny realized. "Run!" They sprinted down the hallway as metal doors began slamming shut behind them. Shadow guards appeared from the walls, their red eyes glowing with hatred. The team's fake dog tags weren't enough to hold them back anymore. "The stairs to the lower levels!" Annie shouted, pointing to a doorway. "We have to get to the machine!" They ran down the stairs, but halfway down, Jenny stopped. Through the wall, she could hear souls screaming, not in fear, but in warning. There was something at the bottom of these stairs, something worse than shadow guards. "Wait!" she called to her team. "It's a trap! They're herding us down to—" Before she could finish, a massive dark shape rose up through the floor. It was like a tornado made of shadow souls, all twisted together into one giant monster. And at its heart, glowing with evil red light, was a familiar face. "Hello again, Soul Walker," said Dr. Stone's voice, now deep and distorted. "Did you really think you destroyed me? I have more than one body, more than one base, and this time, I'm ready for you." Dr. Stone's shadow form filled the entire stairwell, blocking both up and down. Red lighting crackled through his dark body as hundreds of tortured souls swirled inside him. "You see, Jenny," his voice boomed, "after you destroyed my glass body at Pine Valley, my soul found a better home. These shadow souls are so angry, so full of power. They welcomed me as their master." Jenny looked at her team. Their fake dog tags weren't going to help against something this big. She reached for her real tags in the protective pouch, but Dr. Stone laughed. "Your soul powers are useless here. This entire mountain is one big power dampener. I've had 50 years to perfect it. Even your mother couldn't fight this." Suddenly, Jenny noticed something odd. Every time Dr. Stone spoke, the pipes on the walls pulsed with that dark purple energy. She remembered what Annie had said. They were mining soul energy. An idea formed in her mind. "Everyone," she whispered to her team, "when I say now, shoot the pipes, all of them." Tom quietly passed out small explosive charges they'd brought to destroy the machine. Jenny stepped forward, facing Dr. Stone's massive shadow form. "You're wrong about one thing," she said loudly, making sure he was focused on her. "My mother did fight this. She fought it every day she was trapped in your machine, and she taught me something important. Soul energy can't be contained forever. The more you squeeze it—" "Now!" Jenny screamed. The team threw their charges at every pipe in sight. Explosions rang out and purple soul energy burst from the broken pipes like water from a fire hose. The power dampeners overloaded instantly. Dr. Stone roared as the energy hit him. But something unexpected happened. Instead of hurting him, the souls in the pipes began joining his shadow form. He grew larger, darker, more powerful. "Fool," he laughed, "you've only made me stronger. All these souls are mine to control." But Jenny was smiling. "Are they?" She pulled out her mother's dog tags, which were glowing brighter than ever. All the souls flowing into Dr. Stone had weakened the dampeners. More importantly, every soul he absorbed was a direct connection to him, a connection a soul walker could use. Jenny closed her eyes and reached out with her power. Through her mother's tags, she touched every soul inside Dr. Stone's shadow form. But instead of fighting them, she did something else. She showed them the truth. She showed them memories, families waiting at home, children growing up without parents, love and light and freedom. She showed them what they were fighting for at Pine Valley. Most importantly, she showed them they weren't alone anymore. Dr. Stone's laugh turned to a scream as his shadow form began to break apart. The souls inside him were waking up, remembering who they were. One by one, they began fighting back. "Help them!" Jenny shouted to her team. They all pulled out their real dog tags, adding their power to hers. Even Bob Johnson's tags were glowing now as he finally faced the monster he'd served for so long. The shadow form exploded in a burst of light. Dr. Stone's soul was exposed, small, dark, and alone. No more shadows to hide in, no more souls to control. "This isn't possible," he gasped. "I am a god here. I control life and death." "No," Jenny said softly. "You're just another trapped soul. And like Mom always said, every soul deserves to be free." With a final surge of power from her mother's tags, Jenny reached out and touched Dr. Stone's soul. In a flash of bright light, years of evil and darkness burned away. His soul glowed blue once more, finally at peace, finally free. The freed souls filled the air like floating stars, their light changing from purple back to bright blue. Together they surged through the facility, breaking pipes, destroying machines, and freeing every trapped soul they found. Hours later, as the sun rose over the mountain, the team watched Black Pine facility collapse in on itself. Thousands of freed souls rose into the morning sky, finally going home. Among them was Dr. Stone's soul, restored to what it had been before Project Soulkeeper corrupted him. Jenny held her mother's dog tags, now warm and peaceful in her hands. She knew there were more bases out there, more souls to free. But they had learned something valuable. Darkness couldn't exist without light, and every soul, no matter how lost, could find its way home. "Ready for the next one?" Annie asked, already checking her map for other bases. Jenny looked at her team, friends who had become family, brought together by a mission bigger than themselves. Their dog tags glowed softly in the morning light, a reminder of all the souls they had helped and all the ones still waiting. "Yeah," Jenny smiled, feeling her mother's presence in the warm sunrise. "We're ready. After all, every soul has a story, and every story deserves a happy ending."